Sunday morning at table, I talked to you about being invited. I'd like to talk to you a bit further about that this evening. Look with me quickly at Great Commission scriptures. So go to Matthew chapter 28. I suppose at invitation time, you've heard this thousands of times read to you. But look at verse 19 in particular. And where were they supposed to make disciples? Of all the nations. Then turn over to Mark chapter 16. And in verse 15. To whom were they to preach this gospel? All creation. That's even a little bit bigger than all the nations, isn't it? Then turn over to Luke chapter 24. Repentance and forgiveness of sins is to be proclaimed, verse 47 says. And how far is it to be proclaimed? To all the nations. And then turn over to Acts chapter 2. After Jesus told them how big it would be in chapter 1, when Peter preaches about it in chapter 2, verse 39, he told them how inclusive the promise was. It was for them, it was for their descendants, and it was for all of those who were far off. And Bible language, that means the Gentiles, all of us outsiders. So how big is God's invitation? It's as big as the creation. It's all of us. Now, when there are invitations sent out, I want to ask you personally about how you feel about receiving an invitation. If you received an invitation to something really important and then found out that it was only being sent to just a few hundred people in the whole world, how would you feel about that invitation if you got one of them? About how special I am. Now then, when you get the invitation that you find out everybody else in the neighborhood got one, and everybody else in town got one, and everybody else in America got one, and everyone in every other country in the world got one, how do you feel about your invitation now? Are you more or less likely to go? Silly human pride to make me feel special. The reality is, if God had only invited a few thousand people, I wouldn't have been invited. If God had only invited a few 100,000 people, you wouldn't have gotten one either. It actually makes us more special that God invited everybody and that Jesus' death was significant enough to save every single one of us. That's the only way I get included. I'm one of those far off, outside, peripheral, just not in God's mind, but on the edges people. We need to answer this invitation. If you haven't been baptized and would like to confess Christ, or if you need the prayers of brethren for something you're struggling with, that invitation goes to everyone.